Here we go.
Okay. So why do we want to know about history? Imagine, oh, you're a traveler to the most famous tourist destination in the world. That's in Versailles, 12 miles southwest of Paris. Oops, it's not Paris, Texas, it's Paris, France. And there you see this great royal playground that was built in the 18th century, that is the late 1700s, by Louis XIV. And by any measure, it should have bankrupted 18th century France. You know, the place is full of 2,000 acres of gardens, these great granite, white marble structures all over the place. And you only have 2 hours here, so you kind of run around, you don't know exactly what to do, and you go into the Hall of Mirrors and you look at the zinc sculpture court, and all these things are kind of hard and intractable and enigmatic. And finally, though, you see where the people are heading, and French tourist officials are amazed at this year after year. They're heading toward the water. Louis XIV built this estate with 100 reflecting pools, fountains, and jets. And all over the estate, the water shoots up in foamy magnificence, effervescing in the wind, catching rainbows in the spray, and sending forth mist that glistens like millions of diamonds in the sun. Like the fountains in Versailles, life is amazing and amazingly unpredictable. You know, people like action, ESPN, diamonds, glistening. You know, what will those clouds and what will the wind and what will the water do next? It's kind of, unpredictable. People take physics and math because those people do the best in MCAT tests to get into med school, because they have the analytical stuff down. People take history because we've cornered the market on stories. Stories are those wonderful, little information capsules that we use to go out on dates and get jobs and pass down important advice to our children or something like that. You know, the state of Texas could have journals for every student field, but they only have it in history, and this is it. And you can kind of see if you want to pass this around. Luce, I don't know if you can reach up there. But, we've got a lot of our NTCC students able to publish, because stories are cool. Stories, people use them to charm other people. What really is behind all this? Well, there's a lot of rumors, gossip, and secret that occur in our generation. And, people are pretty opaque. They don't really conceal, these things that are going on in their life. But corpses don't cover up information very well. And history gets at the revealing stuff, the kind of unusual interiors. And if you know a lot of stories, if you know a lot of cool details, you can generally move to the center of any cultural organization and generally up in terms of advancement. Stories, again, get you jobs and interviews. If you're interested in business, it doesn't hurt to take a look at Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and see what they did. Knowing more stories generally gives us this wealth that we call knowledge. So you can leverage history. Leverage to go to the middle and to up. And that's why I like to say sometimes history is the balustrade. It's the guardrail that can take you places. That's wonderful, isn't it? But it turns out, though, that history has another lesson it teaches us, and this one isn't quite so nice. Yes, history is a balustrade. It helps us, but it goes into the darkness. History testifies of the darkness. We cannot predict the future. Truths change every generation. The great French philosophers that were around the time of the Great Versailles thing. They all said those science is going to issue in a new world. Well, it isn't issued, a better world. Well, it's issued in the age of the H-bomb and the threat of nuclear holocaust. The most carnal, genocidal century that we're studying in the 20th century, which America, with its cornucopia of supermarkets and magical electronics, somehow stood very aloof from. We've got a lot to be thankful for, I think, living in our country that we'll be looking at. We have a wonderful Karl Marx, the great philosopher, whose philosophy will indoctrinate over half the world of our 20th century that we'll be looking at. Of course, we're in American history, but we're going to be affected by these other trends. Of course, Karl said that the working class was going to take over the world, and there was going to be a new utopia. Well, go move to North Korea, Karl. See how you like it. There was a problem with that prediction. Predictions are made. Even I mean, not only do we make wrong predictions, every generation, the wise people of every generation make foolish predictions. Probably our smartest president, Woodrow Wilson, talked about a new moral order. It didn't happen. No, we never had a new moral order. But even, our scientists that have such a land enthusiasm because, we know the zinc statues of Versailles, the things that are always there, the equations that always work. How many major paradigms have we had of physics in this generation? Albert Einstein thought it was a static universe. Then we had the steady state expansion universe, which broke the second law of thermodynamics, and now we have the Big Bang. Truth is reflexive. It's constantly changing, and history tells us this. People like to watch the History Channel, but we could use more history majors. Maybe people are a little concerned about this darkness. But I think even the greatest patron saint that there is in science, and that's Charles Darwin, and many people pulling after 150 years of biology. I mean, he was wrong on a number of issues of his warm pond theory and his tree of life idea and his idea of pangenesis. I won't go into that, but history shows have problems. They are mired in half-truths. The father of chemistry, Anton Lavoisier, he had a totally different idea of oxygen than what we have today. Truth is reflexive. It's constantly changing. So history is the balustrade, the handrail, that takes us into the darkness. Now, to give us a kind of overview of History 1302, I'm going to kind of concentrate a lot on some of the non-Americans, because they kind of give us a context. We don't really get into global history so much. So to kind of give you a kind of worldview, this will make the story a little more dramatic, too, because some of these people from Germany and Russia give us a real hard time. But I'm going to try to develop the point here in talking about the value of history, that those people who understand lessons 1 and 2 of history, that is, that history is a balustrade, a handrail, and that history brings us into the darkness. It gives us guidance, but it's not going to protect us from the monster. It's just going to give us, guidance. Those who understand both those lessons of history, they do pretty well. They're pretty measured statesmen. They're the good guys. It was the one who just, like the the first lesson of history, these guys who lead us astray. Oh yeah, they'll leverage history. They'll get everything they can get out of it. Now, I used to think that these guys were just a bunch of blood-curdling, tough people. Like, you meet these, gang members in high school, and, they're already immediately threatening you and trying to do something to make you bribe them or something like that. But actually, these guys are all charmers. They know stories. Oh, they know stories real well. But they don't accept the second lesson. They think you can form an equation, and these sociopaths, on the basis of stupid predictions, kill millions of people to try to make these predictions come true. Well, let's see how this works. I think the period that we're studying is the most exciting one in history, because we have the most amazing, unprecedented problems in the history of the world, and some amazing solutions, some of which are worse than the problems. The reason why it's so incredible is that because it's for the first time that we have major cities forming all over the world. We have what was called industrialization, a changing way of making things which causes a proliferation of goods. And yet we have startling inequality, the emergence of liquidation ideologies that scare people, that people think, for instance, if you're communist or you're anarchist, and of course the socialists, we'll be talking about this more. The socialists were the reds. The anarchists were the black. They were both very revolutionary. They talk about, there is no more morality. Good old Karl here, my friend, Karl Marx, he's the one, who says that there is no morality until the working class takes over. So you can do anything you want. This is what made life a little scary. Well, our skyscrapers emerged for the first time in the late 19th century, where we're studying the course, kind of like a crenulated bar graph of profits. And yet, where there was all that money, there was also a tremendous lack of money. And we have, at the same time, a rise of tenements. And today we have water that you can buy in a grocery store. That's been commoditized a little bit. But not air, we don't think. But actually, at this time, if you live in one of these poor tenements, people would scream, "Give me your Luft!" In German, "Give me air, give me air!" I don't have enough, there's so many people, we had such a high density, the highest density in the history of the world in the late 19th century, of people living, in this one place, and, broken windows, and big numbers of families stuffed in just a few rooms. People sharing beds, people would sleep for some hours and then wake up, they have to wake up and swim. So there's a tremendous amount of rape. Also, the countryside gets kind of molested by the urbanites during the late 19th century. It's a time when farmers find themselves in a maze of rising prices, rising costs, actually lowering prices, I should say, for their commodities, and raising costs. And the result, it leads to a lot of bedlam. Our Northeast Texas area, for instance, was an area that was very stirred up with an idea of what we'll call populism in the late 19th century. And if you look, how many of you know that lake between Naples and Texarkana named Wright-Patman, Lake Wright-Patman? That's named after a congressman. He was a 50-year congressman from Northeast Texas. He was also a Hugh Springs valedictorian. But one reason why his girlfriend's father told her to dump that guy when he was 18 was that Wright-Patman did not have enough money for shoes. He was kind of a farmland janitor. Bo Pilgrim, maybe some of you see his statue. He had a little more than the clothes off his back. Pilgrim's Pride began with a $500 investment, which if he had lost, he said he would have faced starvation. Which he said, Bo Pilgrim said, get a real incentive to work very hard. So there's a tremendous amount of rage going on, and violent revolutionary theories like that of Karl Marx and the anarchists of the late 19th century. People aren't taking all this shuffling around and all this mixing up and low cost very nicely, or low wages. And what was the great international sedative for all this potential violence? The Queen, one of our great quasi-historians. We're going to start off Queen Victoria of England. She reigned during the last 3/4 of the 19th century. Notice she's not American, but even in American history, we'll talk about a Victorian age in the late 19th century. And they are characterized by morality, family values, by an emphasis on virtue, which is unlike that of any other time in American history. Queen Victoria rules the British Empire that itself rules a great deal of the world. When they celebrate her Diamond Jubilee in 1897, 1/4 of the world got the day off from work. So here she is, this kind of cute brunette that morphs into a black gown wearing widow. She reads a lot of history. She had a history tutor. She wrote 2,500 words every day, it was imagined. And that seems incredible to me. I mean, in our paper, we want 1,100 words. She wrote 2,500 words every day. But anyway, she was a very astute woman, and one of the things that she does, I think there should almost be a third lesson of history. Because things are so unpredictable, you usually don't want to get into a war with someone your same size unless it's a matter of life and death. Well, she avoided war. She actually coddled the French for the first time. She actually said some nice things about the Americans. And she had a very peaceful order with Britain at the head. So America's number 2 when we begin the course. We have to wait till 1900 when we're really moving into number 1 place. But another thing about Queen Victoria and the way she learned from history is that she knew that a lot of the problems of the British aristocracy, that is the upper class group of British society, such as the Queen and the princes and stuff, had piled up a lot of scarlet sins. Her mother, the Duchess of Kent, had all this kind of lovers on the side, and her father had illegitimate children all over the place. And she decided that really you need a more prim morality to set a model for people, someone you can believe in. And her and her husband Albert set the style for a whole family-ordered existence that we call Victorianism. They popularized ice skating and having Santa Clauses. And Albert, rather than becoming a lecherous barnacle, actually becomes a financier and increases crown revenue for Victoria by 1,200%. So he does stuff too. But the most amazing legacy of this most amazing queen is that she has 12 children. And they in turn have 90 grands and great-grands while she's still alive. These scatter out to all the thrones in Europe, which is the epicenter of world power, except for America. Now she's got all these grands and great-grands on the thrones of Europe. Of course, it takes her like half her time just writing out all these Christmas cards and birthday letters, to keep these kids all, kind of together. But can you imagine the leverage that this woman has? It said that Britain had a unique resource in the history of the world to have their own children or grandchildren on every throne of Europe. And it's basically a peaceful order that she presides over. It's after Victoria that we have a new generation of British leaders who get involved in World War I. They let the rage funnel up from their society. World War I will start with England basically versus Germany, which was a kind of an up-and-comer. Some 16 million people will die because of this terrible trench warfare with triplanes and machine guns that we'll be talking more about. Not heeding the history of Great Victoria. Well, we have this sort of feminine image then, because when you were working 12 hours in a mill, it was not some prevaricating businessman that constantly irritated you. It was a maternal woman calling out to you in love. However, we tended to replace the feminine symbol by the early 20th century, early 1900s, with Theodore Roosevelt. He was a historian, and he studied history to good effect, I believe. For instance, he was a historian of the American West. He wrote books talking about the frontier thesis. We're going to talk a little bit later about concepts, but the frontier thesis basically is the idea that America was transformed by its encounter with the West. And as he saw this as center to American character through this history, he goes to the center of the culture. He closes by mountains. He's the first one that uses cowboy hats. And this idea of great Western possibility and horizons. And why else does George Bush and Ronald Reagan later on drive minivans and then, or ride horses in major minivans? Because they have this idea of the West as a great creative environment. He does that. Another thing that Theodore Roosevelt did as a historian, a professional historian who wrote a number of books in history, was that he looked at the first active presidencies, George Washington, Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln. They could get 1301. How many of you have had 1301? Doesn't really matter if you haven't. That's okay. The first issue. But in any case, he knew about those active presidencies, and he reinvents the modern activist presidency. So next time, we're going to look at a lot of more low-key presidents, like Ulysses Grant, all the way down to Benjamin Harrison and Grover Cleveland. But the more modern activist president, we reinvented by a historian who knew the stories, who knew those little hints that history can often give to ahead. Well, another reason why you don't want to get into equal sides warfare, I don't think, is that sometimes it builds up a need for vengeance on the part of the country that loses. And this was the case with Germany after World War I. We have the rise of the vengeance master, Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, born in 1889, was the son of a minor customs official. He had a kind of hard knock story, basically, to tell. But he grew up into a flaming racist, and he understood the first lesson. He was an autodidact. That is, he read a lot. He wrote a book that was folksy, if you don't mind, virulent racism, known as My Battle. But Adolf Hitler also, of course, stormed against the Jews in a very ahistorical way. He said that the Jews, that were 1% of the German population, if they could be vanquished, would lead to a golden era, where the Aryans, with blonde hair and blue eyes, would start a new era of peace and prosperity for Germany. So he would storm against the Jews, and this helped him to come to power at a time when Germany was on its knees and paying for World War I. And he would say that the Jews have started relativity, divorce, psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud was a rotten Jew, and then whenever you look at the center of a cultural activity, you see, like some maggot in a rotting body, a kike. And that dieses Zukunft recht los uns gehört, weil die Bewegung Leben unseres Volkes und damit das Leben der Bewegung, das Leben Deutschland. Sorry guys, getting a little carried away. But it was said, I heard this story and I can hardly believe it, but someone told me there was a guy with a toothbrush mustache who looked like Adolf Hitler, who was a professor at the University of Michigan. And according to this fellow instructor who actually taught him in TCC, he said that the first day of class, this guy would come with his toothbrush mustache to class, and he would say, I know I may look like Adolf Hitler, but I'm not that evil. Which may have been a little disconcerting. In any case, we may know that Hitler, of course, then takes off to actually killing 6 million Jews and firing up the German people to take over most of Europe. This is very scary because in the 1930s, America is in a depression. Our army shrinks down to 16th largest in the world. We're not really ready for another war. And here we got this sociopath with ahistorical ideas. He can predict the future. He knows the equation. He's going to kill a lot of people to make it happen. Well, the same time that we got this terrible, reckless guy, we got the worst possible guy of all history. This is Joseph Stalin. Like Hitler, he was a high school dropout, but he was an autodidact. He read all the time. In fact, his daughter, who defected to the United States from the Soviet Union, and by the way, the Soviet Union, which Stalin led, was a huge country. Our arch enemy through most of 1302, our course, stretched through 11 time zones. He was dedicated to the theory of Karl Marx about the final triumph of the working class. Stalin, who leads the Soviet Union, of course, predicts the death of the United States. But anyway, his daughter, Svetlana, who defects to the United States, she one time characterized her father as, "He's nothing but a heartless bookworm." Stalin knew his stories. He could charm people. He was also incredibly devious. He set up these mass murderers who were like heads of the secret police. One of them was named Genrikh Yagoda. You don't even know these names. Genrikh Yagoda, Nikolai Yezhov, Georgy Melenkov, and Lavrentiy Beria. And these psychopaths would kill off millions of people individually. They were head of the secret police. And then Stalin would knock them off. So Yezhov, who was a dwarf, kills millions. Stalin knocks him off. He blames all the murder. Stalin believed that the path to progress involved terror. Bringing terror throughout the population, so all the people who opposed his wonderful revolution would be killed off. But even some who weren't, it was random after a while. Because just by, stirring up all this terror, we would finally motivate people to a new era that we could maybe call off the terror. It was kind of idealistic, but it was scary. Didn't believe in the second lesson of history. Believed he could predict what was going to happen. Willing to murder 24 million people. 24 million people. He's the worst one of all. But what makes this really scary in our course is by 1940, Stalin and Hitler have teamed up. And they're destroying countries like Poland and France. And isn't it wonderful that we had a historian following the breach who could perform a little firewall service for the United States? This is Winston Churchill, who wrote several books of history. Now, Winston Churchill, when he first went to equivalent of high school in England and tried to get to university, really did not have a lot going for him. He spoke with a lisp and a stammer. He never did make it to the university. He took the escalator ride of being a war hero up to the front ranks of British society, but he had a lot of problems. For instance, he turned to alcoholism for a while in his life. And one time a lady saw him, he was like totally soused. And she addressed him and said, "You're the most disgusting drunk I've ever seen in my whole life." And Churchill said, "Well, that may be so, but tomorrow I'll be sober and you'll still be ugly." He probably got that story from somewhere in history, but I'm not sure where to tell a joke like that. But in any case, being interested in being a leader, he studied orators like Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone and Demosthenes, the great Greek orator, put pebbles in his mouth, spoke by the seashore, up the ante, and use these lessons to become number one in British society. Now this was very important because by 1941, Britain was being attacked by both Stalin and the Nazis under Hitler. And we needed someone to stand because the United States wasn't even involved in war yet. That's when Winston Churchill gave the most important speech ever in the summer of 1940 before the British Parliament, the representative body in England, before the world, because the BBC carried it, British Broadcasting Corporation. And actually, though he was speaking to the world, he was really interested in speaking to one man, the American president, who needed aid. Does anyone know what aid the American president could give big time? Because something had been discovered less than 100 miles near Mount Pleasant. What? Oil, Kilgore oil, Texas oil, black gold, Texas steel. Churchill needs oil. You can't fight a war without oil. And Americans had a lot of oil, all business in Texas, right? It's not oil business. Well, anyway, Franklin had some lease on that. So Winston Churchill's got to impress Franklin Roosevelt, but this won't be so easy because France had tried to get American aid, but France had fallen down like a card before Germany's Panzer tanks. And so can Churchill do it? Well, he turns on his charm and his stories and gives this famous speech. We will never surrender. We will fight from the beaches. We will fight from the hills. We will fight from the schools. We will fight from the churches. But we will never surrender. Well, people are applauding. He goes on and says, and be sure, if the Nazis do come, you may have to beat them over the heads with the blunt ends of broken beer bottles, which is bloody well all we got. Well, Franklin Roosevelt turned off his radio, which he was listening to with his advisor, Harry Hopkins. And he said, Harry, as long as that old bastard's in charge, Britain will never surrender. Giving our money to them won't be like throwing our money down the rat hole, as in France. And sure enough, Franklin Roosevelt gives money and help and oil to Britain. Britain performs as a firewall. Hitler and Stalin then turn against one another. And America finally can wait till Pearl Harbor, to get involved in the war. So Hitler, not really a good historian, though he did read a lot of history. He let Germany become involved in a two-front war, just like in World War I, which had been a mistake. He does it again. He invades Russia. He double-crosses Stalin. Napoleon had done that 130 years before. It had failed. Because the roads are kind of bad, kind of like Mexico. Only when it snows out, it's really bad, like it was at Pittsburgh yesterday, unfortunately, I guess, with one young man dying with a car wreck. But in any case, Hitler makes a lot of bloopers, which is good for us. And, the Soviet Union, though, keeps on standing, and it's our enemy way into the 50s and 60s and 70s. And yet, Stalin creates a kind of brain-dead society that doesn't know anything about its history, that's always based on theory. One of the things he believes in is Trofim Lysenko's vision for the grand transformation of nature. Lysenko is kind of like a barefoot scientist, a Russian, who believed that if you would do deep plowing, and you made baby sows when they get to be 160 pounds, they can still have children, little piglets. You do all these things, you're going to have an incredible agricultural yield. Now this is stuff that hadn't even been tried. It's not even historical. Trofim Lysenko said to Stalin that because we have a new socialist society, there'll be just so much more enthusiasm. People watch their sows a little better, and that's going to make up the difference. But the results were awful. Millions of people died. The pig, the sows could mate at 160 pounds, but they couldn't give enough milk to keep the piglets alive. There were broken plows all over the place. And what makes the story even more weird is that in the 1950s, China becomes communist as well. And they tried Lysenko's theories again. How weird. And some 30 million people died in the Great Leap Forward, the greatest administrative disaster ever in the history of the world, following ahistorical agricultural practices. Everyone, of course, was predicting the Soviet Union was going to win one day. They had twice the army size our had. They had more multiple warhead missiles at one point. They had all these nukes. They're really going to blow up the world. A lot of people in Texas were saying, better red than dead. Better dead than red. Better dead than red. Because they didn't want the Soviet Union to take us over. It was a really jittery time. But fortunately, in 1991, our great adversary, the Soviet Union, falls over like a dinosaur with a brain hemorrhage. They hadn't taught their history. They try stupid things like have been tried in the French Revolution, like having a 10-day work week. Only a 2-day work week. People don't like that. They don't work very well. And of course, they hadn't taught the history of ethnic rivalries that did overtake Russia. It was a brain-dead society in 1991, but suddenly it just fell apart. Yay! America won. So much for the Soviet Union. And one of the people that helped bring this to me was another history. Well, he was a history major, not an historian like Theodore Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, but he was a history major at Harvard, Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt is our winning president. I don't even like him, but I admit he was a pretty good guy in some respects. Because the way he deals with World War II. In World War I, Americans lied to the people pretty much. A lot of propaganda, and the people aren't really behind the war. In World War II, we basically told the terrible truths, and people responded. In World War I, the Democrats tried to win the peace. In World War I, we won, yay, but we lost the peace. In World War II, we won, yay, but we won the peace, yay. And one of the reasons was Franklin Roosevelt knew about Woodrow Wilson and how he had bungled the First World War peace process by not letting any Republicans into the process. He came up with a bipartisan policy, and things worked. We've still had the peace, worldwide at least, since the end of the Second World War. And I think it's partly because a history major, learned some stories that were kind of helpful. He's the man on the dime, Franklin Roosevelt. One president runs, for four terms. So you might know here we got two Roosevelts that are very important. Teddy. If you think of Teddy as a teddy bear, think of him first, as you have a teddy bear when you're young. Teddy bear, and then Franklin as the second, Roosevelt. Think of a rose and a belt. Roosevelt. Oh, we're almost through with the whole course now. Already here in the first day, and we've reached the 1990s. Any of you born in the 1990s? Some of you? Carrie, and Richard, great. So this is the time, of course, of tremendous prosperity. It's the only time in world history when we have 12 years of straight prosperity. No wonder some of you were born, right? Any of you recognize any of these toys that came in? The Soviet Union was dead. Nazi Germany was dead. America had Bill Clinton as our president. But no one recognized Beanie Babies, Boppets, Sockets. So we had a lot of these interesting toys. It was a time when Francis Fukuyama, a distinguished Japanese-American historian, is still a good read, wrote The End of History, where he predicted liberal democracy had triumphed. There could be nothing that really challenges the prosperity, the efficiency of the democratic capitalist society that we'll be talking a little bit about in the next few sections. Yay! We won! No more problems!